So we were studying Inter-Domain Routing Protocol, BGP. Let me first see how much you remember. Let me flash this figure to jog your memory. Basically, BGP has eBGP sessions and iBGP sessions. The eBGP sessions are used to exchange IP prefix information, and the routing algorithm that is followed there is the path vector algorithm. An important point to note is that an AS need not export all the IP prefixes it has learned. We will see this as part of exporting routes, and similarly, whatever routes it has heard about, it may not import them. This is covered under importing routes. So via eBGP, whatever routes you have learned, you install in the routers within the AS via the iBGP sessions. Both the iGP protocol as well as the eGP protocol, that is the border gateway protocol, together work to fill the forwarding table at a router. So with this background, let's first look at exporting routes. So let's look at this ISP. This ISP has some internal IP prefixes, by which I mean the customers that this ISP is serving. It knows how to reach all these internal IP prefixes via its internal routers. Not only that, this ISP may have heard of IP prefix 1, by which I mean this is not just one single IP prefix but a set of IP prefixes, and similarly it would have heard a bunch of IP prefix from some other border gateway routers. So these I am representing in this. So it has a whole bunch of IP prefixes. Now out of these, it has to decide which IP prefixes to advertise to the other ISPs. So what does a router advertisement mean? Let's get this straight. For example, let's say this is a border gateway router B, which is connected to another border gateway router A that belongs to another ISP. Now, if B were to advertise a given IP prefix, say P, it is basically telling A that if you send me a packet with the destination as P, I will deliver that packet to the intended destination. So that is the service B is providing to A. If you don't want to provide certain service, you should ensure that you do not advertise the prefixes to this router A. So this will become clear as we proceed further. This ISP has many customers, and the IP prefixes for this customers, let me call them IPF. So this IPF, should it expose to an ISP that is providing service to it? And should it expose it to a peer that is providing peering service to it? What do you think? Well, the customer routes, it should ideally expose to everyone because you are taking money from the customers to provide this service. And as more and more traffic goes to the customers will need fatter and fatter pipes, thereby you will make more revenue. So the customer routes you have to expose to whatever peering relation or the transit relation that you have. Now suppose this ISP learned about certain IP prefixes, let me call them again IPF, from its provider. Now these IP prefixes, do you think it should expose to the peer? That is another ISP with which it has a peering relation? Definitely not. If you were to export it, what the peer will do is to reach some network within this, it will now start sending data via you. These networks that are represented by these IP prefixes are not your customers. So in which case you are carrying traffic from the peer ISP to the provider ISP where you are not getting any benefit out of it. So you should not export these prefixes you have learned from your provider to your peer. Now what about, should you expose them to your customers? Yes, you should expose them to the customers because you are providing the service to your customers. So the customer should know how to reach this other information. So they will go via you. That is why they are paying you the money for it. So the transit provider routes are exported to the customers but not to the peers. What about peer routes? Again, this ISP is going to hear certain IP prefixes from the peers. Now these information, should it expose to the provider ISP? Well, again no, because if you were to expose it to the provider may now start using you to deliver traffic to the particular peer. And again, this traffic has no relevance to you, so you should not export the peer prefixes to your provider. What about exposing them to your customers? Again, the same logic. Your customers, you are providing a service, and peering is mainly established for not going via the provider. So if you expose it, the customer traffic can now go in this particular direction. What about exposing the information you heard from one peer to the other peer that you are connected with? Again, no, because then this peer will use you to send traffic to this other peer, and again you are not going to get much out of this particular traffic. So basically, in this particular case, you export this prefixes that you have learned from the peer to the customers, but not to other peers or the provider. So this is how you control what traffic flows within your autonomous system. Basically, what this all boils down to is also that you only want your customer traffic to go through your ISP. You don't want any other extraneous traffic to go through you. So the earlier slides were telling what routes to export. Now in this process, you are going to hear about many routes. Now you have to decide what routes to import. A router within an ISP is going to hear about routes, and these routes can come from different sources. So this route to a given destination can come from a customer, or it can come from a peer, or it can come from a provider. Now, which route should it install? So the policy there is this, that the customer route should be given more preference over peer and provider. Why like this? Suppose a customer said, you can reach me via this particular IP prefix. A customer router is saying this, and the peer also is also telling this, maybe because this customer is multi-homed. And since you're directly connected, you want better performance for the customers. So you should import the route provided by the customer over the route provided by the peer. And now why peer over provider? Because I mentioned this reason earlier. If peer is providing a route, this money, there is no money involved here. So if you send, you are not going to have to pay any money. But if you send it via the provider, then you have to pay the money to the provider. In other words, if the peer has a route to the same destination and the provider also has a route to the same destination, you would prefer peer over the provider. As you can see, very complex policies, what IP prefixes to export, what IP prefixes to import, all of this is a function of the kind of relationship you have with your other ISPs.